In the glittering, treacherous world of Regency London, one name was spoken only in hushed, fearful whispers: Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Ravenshire. A man sculpted from marble and shadow, haunted by a past that kept all of society at a cautious distance. When the penniless but spirited Miss Eleanor Vance arrives in town, she captures his attention against his will. His first words to her are not a greeting, but a cold, desperate warning: "Stay away from me." Yet in the gilded ballrooms and misty parks of Mayfair, a dangerous dance begins. For the Duke warned her to stay away with his words, but his eyes, his actions, and his very soul followed her every step. The London season of 1817 had begun a veritable meat market for the titled and the wealthy, and Eleanor Vance felt like a lamb being led to auction. As the poor relation of the kindly but socially anxious Lady Danbury, her presence was a quiet anomaly. She possessed neither a grand dowry nor a grand name, only a quick wit she'd learned to conceal, and a pair of observant green eyes that saw far too much. It was during a particularly dreary Tuesday afternoon stroll through Hyde Park that she first saw him. He was not merely riding a horse, he was commanding it a magnificent black stallion that moved with the same contained power as its master. The Duke of Ravenshire. Eleanor knew the name, of course. Who didn't? He was the dark prince of society's fairy tale, a man whose immense fortune and ancient title were overshadowed only by the tragic scandal that clung to him like his own shadow. As his horse drew near, the drizzling rain began to fall in earnest. Her cousin, fussing with a troublesome bonnet ribbon, had fallen a few paces behind. The Duke reined his horse to a stop, his gaze the colour of a winter storm falling upon Eleanor. It was an unnervingly direct look, devoid of the flirtatious preamble or polite curiosity she was accustomed to. It was a look of assessment, of recognition, Miss Vance, he said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth as polished granite, but just as cold. She was startled that he knew her name. They had never been formally introduced. "Your Grace." She managed, dipping into a small curtsy, the damp hem of her pelisse brushing against the wet gravel. He dismounted in one fluid, athletic movement that bespoke a life of command. Up close, he was even more imposing. Taller than she had imagined, with a severe, handsome face that looked as though it had never known a genuine smile. His black riding coat, tailored to perfection by a master on Savile Row, fit his broad shoulders without a single wrinkle. "You are new to London," he stated, not asked. "I am, Your Grace, a guest of my aunt, Lady Danbury." A muscle worked in his jaw. He seemed to be wrestling with some internal conflict. His gaze swept over her from her simple bonnet to her practical walking shoes, and for a fleeting moment she saw something other than ice in his eyes. A flicker of something akin to regret. "Then allow me to offer you the single most valuable piece of advice you will receive this season," he said, his voice dropping lower, imbued with a chilling sincerity. He took a half-step closer, forcing her to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. The scent of rain leather and something uniquely masculine washed over her. "Stay away from me." Eleanor's breath caught. Of all the things she had expected, this was not one. It was not a snub nor an insult. It was a command, a plea, and a warning, all coiled into 4 stark words. I beg your pardon. There is nothing to pardon," he said, his expression hardening again, the brief vulnerability vanishing. "I am not a man whose acquaintance will bring you any joy. My company is a poison, Miss Vance. My reputation, a stain. You seem a sensible young woman. Be sensible about this." Before she could form a reply, he had bowed stiffly, remounted his stallion, and urged the magnificent beast into a canter, leaving her standing in the thickening rain with a racing heart and 1,000 unanswered questions. The encounter had lasted no more than a minute, yet it had unsettled her more than any polite conversation or cutting remark ever could. Later that evening, while helping her aunt untangle a skein of embroidery silk, she dared to ask, "Aunt, what is the story of the Duke of Ravenshire?" Lady Danbury dropped her needle. "Eleanor, my dear, that is not a subject for polite company. But we are not in polite company. It is only us." Her aunt sighed, her kindly face clouded with worry. "They say he is cursed. His older brother George was the heir, the golden child. He was killed in a duel 5 years ago, a sordid affair over a married woman and opera singer. Alistair, the current duke, was his second. He watched his brother die. Some say he could have stopped it. Some whisper he even provoked it, that he was in love with the woman himself. The whole affair ruined his family's name. His father died of a broken heart a year later, and Alistair inherited everything, the title, the fortune, and the guilt." Eleanor's mind flashed back to the park. "My company is a poison." The words now carried a terrible weight. He wasn't just a brooding duke. He was a man living in the ruins of his family's legacy, a man who believed himself to be a harbinger of doom. And for some inexplicable reason, he had chosen to warn her. The question was why, 2 weeks later, Eleanor found herself in the glittering crush of Lady Wexhall's annual ball. It was a spectacle of jewels, silk, and suffocating perfume. She felt entirely out of place, a brown sparrow in a flock of peacocks. Her gown, a simple white muslin, was elegant, but paled in comparison to the elaborate confections worn by the other debutantes. She was trying her best to become one with the wallpaper when she was cornered by Lord Finch, a man with a moderately respectable title, an immoderate sense of self-importance, and damp palms. "Miss Vance," he simpered, blocking her escape. "Hiding in the shadows. A lady of your unique charms should be on the dance floor." The pause before "unique" was a carefully placed insult. He meant her lack of dowry. "I find the view from here quite sufficient," my Lord Eleanor replied, her tone polite but firm. "Nonsense. A country mouse like you must be overwhelmed. Allow me to guide you. It is not every day one gets to see society at its finest, though I suppose it must be a stark reminder of what is beyond your reach. The cruelty was casual, designed to wound without causing a scene." Eleanor's cheeks flushed with heat. Before she could deliver the sharp retort that was forming on her tongue, a cold voice cut through the air like a shard of ice. "And I suppose, Finch, that a man of your limited intellect must find it a constant struggle to form a coherent sentence. Yet you persevere. One must admire the effort, if not the result." Both Eleanor and Lord Finch turned. The Duke of Ravenshire stood there, an avenging angel, clad in immaculate black evening wear. He hadn't raised his voice yet. The entire conversation around them seemed to falter and die. People did not just make way for the Duke. The very atmosphere seemed to part for him. Lord Finch paled dramatically. Your Grace. I was merely making conversation with Miss Vance." The Duke's stormy eyes flickered to Eleanor for a fraction of a second before settling back on the flustered lord. "Your attempts at conversation are as clumsy as your attempts at dancing. I saw you tread on Lady Jersey's hem twice. Now, if you will excuse us, I believe your mother is searching for you. She seemed concerned you might misplace your own head." The dismissal was absolute. Lord Finch, sputtering like a wet firecracker, bowed hastily and fled into the crowd. Silence descended. Eleanor looked up at the Duke, her heart hammering against her ribs. He had defended her. The man who had explicitly warned her to stay away had just stepped out of the shadows to be her champion. He was supposed to be a poisonous stain, but his actions were a balm. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said softly. He did not reply. He merely gave her a single, sharp nod, his expression unreadable, his jaw tight. And then, as quickly as he had appeared, he turned and melted back into the crowd, leaving her with the distinct impression that he was furious with himself for his own intervention. For the rest of the evening she felt his presence like a physical touch. He never came near her again, never spoke another word to her. But she would glance across the ballroom and find his eyes on her. He stood near a marble column, nursing a glass of brandy, watching. He was not watching her with warmth or affection. It was a fierce proprietary gaze, the look of a man guarding something he had no right to possess. When the boorish Sir Reginald Pummery made a lurching attempt to engage her in conversation, the Duke simply shifted his stance, and the glare he sent over the rim of his glass was enough to make Sir Reginald remember a pressing engagement elsewhere. When her dance card remained conspicuously empty, a subtle word from the Duke to a young, terrified lieutenant resulted in a polite, if trembling, request for a quadrille. He was a ghost at her feast, a silent guardian. He kept his distance, honoring his own warning, yet his heart, or at least his obsessive attention, followed her every step. It was maddening. It was terrifying. And to a part of her she refused to acknowledge it was the most thrilling thing that had ever happened to her. She left the ball that night more confused than ever. The Duke of Ravenshire was a man of profound contradictions. He pushed her away with his words while pulling her into his orbit with his actions. He was a puzzle she was not meant to solve, a locked room she was forbidden to enter. But as she lay in her bed that night, Eleanor Vance knew with a certainty that both frightened and exhilarated her that she was going to find the key. Eleanor's curiosity had become an obsession. The Duke's behavior at the ball had only deepened the mystery. He was a man at war with himself, and she inexplicably was the battlefield. Determined to understand, she sought refuge in a place where the past was not whispered in scandalous rumors, but recorded in black and white, a dusty public archive. She told her aunt she was visiting a lending library, a plausible enough excuse. For hours she sat at a heavy oak table, her fingers smudged with ink as she carefully turned the brittle pages of newspapers from the spring of 1812. Finally she found it, an article in the London Chronicle tucked away on an inside page. "Duel at dawn claims heir Mr. George Beaumont, eldest son and heir of the Duke of Ravenshire, was tragically killed in an illegal duel held yesterday morning on Putney Heath. His opponent, Mr. Julian Croft, also sustained serious injuries and is not expected to live. The dispute is believed to have concerned the affections of a Mrs. Isabelle Dubois, a celebrated soprano at the Royal Opera House." The article was brief, clinical, but it was the final paragraph that made Eleanor's blood run cold. The seconds for the duel were Mr. Alistair Beaumont, the deceased's younger brother, and Viscount Ashworth, a cousin of Mr. Croft. Sources close to the affair suggest that Mr. Alistair Beaumont had ample opportunity to de-escalate the conflict, but failed to do so. Some even claim his own actions. The preceding evening may have fanned the flames of the dispute, a charge the Ravenshire family vehemently denies. Lord Ashworth was too distraught to provide a full statement. Alistair failed to do so. The words echoed the whispers her aunt had shared. This was the root of it all. This was the source of the poison. He had stood on a misty field and watched his brother die, and the world had pointed a finger and accused him of inaction or worse. She kept digging. Mrs. Isabelle Dubois, the opera singer, had vanished from London society almost immediately after the incident. Mr. Julian Croft had indeed died of his injuries 3 days later. And Viscount Ashworth, the name seemed familiar. She searched the society pages of the current papers. There he was, Philip de Vere, Viscount Ashworth. A man known for his sharp tongue and even sharper gambling habits, he was still very much a part of the London scene. Eleanor felt a chill creep up her spine. This wasn't just a story of a tragic duel. It was a web of living, breathing people of grudges and grief that had not faded with time. The Duke wasn't haunted by a ghost. He was haunted by a memory, a moment where his life had fractured. Armed with this new knowledge, the world looked different. When she saw the Duke from a distance in the park the next day, she didn't just see an arrogant nobleman. She saw the younger brother who had stood as a second, the man who had perhaps carried a weapon for his brother, and watched it be used with fatal consequence. She saw the weight of that morning in the severe set of his shoulders. Her chance to test her new understanding came unexpectedly. Lady Danbury, feeling adventurous, had dragged Eleanor to Tattersall's, the famous horse auction house. The place was a maelstrom of masculinity. The smell of hay horses and damp wool was overpowering. As they were navigating the crowded viewing ring, a commotion broke out. A man with a florid face and a sneering smile had stopped directly in front of them. Eleanor recognized him from the society pages. Viscount Ashworth. "Well, well," Ashworth said, his voice carrying easily. "If it isn't the ghost of Ravenshire himself." The Duke, who had been inspecting a fine grey mare, turned slowly. His face was a mask of cold fury. "Ashworth, I am surprised to see you in a place of such fine breeding. I had assumed you preferred the gutter." Ashworth laughed, a nasty, grating sound. "Always quick with the insult, Beaumont, just as you were that night. Quick with your words, but slow with your actions when it mattered. Tell me, do you still wake up hearing the sound of your brother's last breath?" The air crackled with tension. Everyone within earshot had fallen silent, shamelessly eavesdropping. The Duke's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He looked ready to commit murder. Eleanor didn't think. She acted. She stepped forward, deliberately stumbling, and letting out a small cry as she bumped into the Viscount. "Oh, forgive me, my lord," she exclaimed, her voice filled with feigned distress. "How clumsy of me. I seem to have lost my footing." The interruption shattered the moment. Ashworth, thrown off balance by both the physical and social disruption, was forced to turn his attention to her. "Watch where you are going, girl," he snapped. "My sincerest apologies," Eleanor said, dipping a curtsy. The Duke's eyes found hers over Ashworth's shoulder. The raw fury in them was replaced by a flicker of stunned surprise. He saw what she had done. She had given him an escape, a way out of the confrontation without violence or further scandal. He seized the opening. "My aunt's companion is unused to such crowds," he said, his voice level once more. He stepped to Eleanor's side, his presence a solid, protective wall. "Allow me to escort you ladies somewhere less crowded." He offered his arm, not to Lady Danbury but to Eleanor. It was a breach of protocol so flagrant that it was a statement in itself. Trembling slightly, she placed her hand on his sleeve. The wool of his coat was fine and hard over the rigid muscle beneath. Without another glance at the fuming Viscount Ashworth, the Duke of Ravenshire led her away, his silent, shocking gesture speaking volumes more than any words ever could. The Duke led them from the clamour of the auction ring to a quieter side stable. He procured a glass of water for Lady Danbury, who was fanning herself dramatically, and settled her onto a bale of hay. Then he turned to Eleanor. The silence between them was thick with unspoken things. "That was a foolish risk you took, Miss Vance," he said, his voice low and rough. "It seemed a better alternative than seeing you engage in fisticuffs with the Viscount in the middle of Tattersall's," she retorted quietly, her courage surprising her. A ghost of a smile so faint it was barely there touched his lips for an instant. Ashworth is a viper. You would do well to avoid him. Much as I should do well to avoid you, the question slipped out before she could stop it. His face shuttered immediately. The cold mask was back in place. Precisely. Before their strained conversation could continue, the sky, which had been threatening all day, finally broke. Rain began to fall in a torrential downpour, drumming loudly on the stable roof. It was clear they would not be leaving any time soon. "My carriage is nearby," the Duke said. After a moment, his tone clipped and formal. "Allow me to see you home." It was an offer they could not refuse. An hour later, after a chaotic dash through the deluge, Eleanor found herself seated opposite him in the opulent confines of the Ravenshire carriage. Lady Danbury, exhausted by the day's drama, had promptly fallen asleep in her corner, leaving Eleanor and the Duke entirely intimately alone. The carriage was a world unto itself, insulated from the storm raging outside. The rhythmic drumming of the rain on the roof and the gentle sway of the vehicle created a strange, confidential atmosphere. For several long minutes, neither of them spoke. The Duke stared out the window, his profile etched against the grey, rain-streaked glass. "He blames me for his cousin's death," he said suddenly, his voice quiet, almost swallowed by the sound of the storm. He was still looking out the window, as if he couldn't bear to look at her while he spoke. "Julian Croft. He believes I provoked the duel that killed him and my brother." Eleanor's heart ached for him. "And did you?" she asked, her voice gentle. He finally turned his head, and his stormy eyes met hers. The pain in them was raw, unguarded. "No, but I didn't stop it. I should have. George, my brother. He was reckless, ruled by his passions. I was always the sensible one, the cold one. He came to me that night enraged. He said Croft had insulted Isabel's honour. I told him he was being a fool, that the woman was not worth it. We argued. Viciously. He paused, swallowing hard. They were my last words to him. That he was a fool. A single shuddering breath escaped him. The next morning on that field, I tried to reason with him, but he was beyond listening. He was determined to see it through. And I stood there and watched my brother die over a woman who left the country a week later, without a backward glance. Ashworth is right about one thing. I do hear it. Every single day. The confession hung in the air between them, a testament to 5 years of buried grief and guilt. Eleanor saw him not as a duke, not as a forbidding figure of society, but as a man shattered by loss and trapped in a prison of his own making. Impulsively, she reached across the small space between them and laid her hand on his. His skin was cold, but a jolt like lightning shot up her arm at the contact. His hand was large, strong, and for a moment it remained perfectly still beneath hers. Then slowly, he turned his hand over and curled his fingers around hers, his grip tight, almost desperate. He did not pull away. He held her hand as if it were a lifeline, his thumb stroking gently over her knuckles. His gaze held hers, and in the depths of his eyes she saw a maelstrom of emotions, gratitude, sorrow, and a spark of something else, something warm and dangerous that made her breath catch in her throat. The carriage rocked, throwing her slightly forward. He instinctively put out his other hand to steady her, his palm resting on her arm. Suddenly, the space between them felt impossibly small. His face was inches from hers. She could see the faint lines around his eyes, the slight stubble on his jaw. His gaze dropped to her lips. The world seemed to stop. The rain, the carriage, the sleeping form of her aunt, it all faded away. There was only the intense magnetic pull between them. He leaned in, his intention clear, his eyes dark with a longing that mirrored her own. Her own lips parted in anticipation, and then with a groan that seemed torn from his very soul, he pulled back. He released her hand as if it had burned him, and retreated to his side of the carriage, turning his face back to the window. The wall was back up higher and more impenetrable than ever. "Forgive me," he rasped, his voice thick with self-loathing. "That was inexcusable." The carriage rumbled on through the London streets, the silence within, now heavier and more charged than before. He had shown her his deepest wound, and then, in a moment of weakness, had almost shown her his heart. And the retreat, the swift and brutal rejection, was more painful than any insult Lord Finch could ever have devised. He had warned her to stay away, and now more than ever she understood why. Getting close to him wasn't just dangerous, it was utterly devastatingly heartbreaking. The near intimacy of the carriage ride left an indelible mark on Eleanor. She could no longer pretend her interest in the Duke was mere curiosity. The connection she had felt, the raw pain she had witnessed, had forged a bond she was powerless to deny. But Alistair, true to his nature, retreated completely. He was absent from the next several social events, and when she did glimpse him riding in the park, he would incline his head in a curt, formal acknowledgement before steering his horse in the opposite direction. The brief thaw between them had been followed by a deep and bitter frost. Eleanor, however, had a new adversary to occupy her thoughts, Viscount Ashworth. After the incident at Tattersall's, she felt his malevolent gaze on her at every turn. He would watch her from across a room, a cruel, speculative smile on his lips. He was a predator, and she knew, with a dreadful certainty, that he saw her as a pawn in his long-standing war with the Duke. His opening move was subtle. He began to spread rumours, quiet, insidious whispers that painted Eleanor as a grasping social climber, a country mouse with an unseemly ambition to ensnare the troubled, wealthy Duke of Ravenshire. He twisted the Duke's public defence of her into an act of pity, and their shared carriage ride into a clandestine, inappropriate assignation. Lady Danbury began to receive concerned visits from her friends, her drawing-room filled with the clinking of teacups and the rustle of worried whispers. "My dear Eleanor," her aunt said one afternoon, her brow furrowed with anxiety, "perhaps it would be best if we were more discreet. Viscount Ashworth has a powerful voice in society, and your name is being mentioned in a most unflattering light." Eleanor's heart sank. Ashworth wasn't just attacking her. He was using her to isolate Alistair further, proving the Duke's own belief that his company was a poison. Anyone who got close to him would be targeted. The situation escalated at the annual masquerade at Vauxhall Gardens. The gardens were a dizzying fantasy of twinkling lights, hidden grottos, and masked revellers. It was a place where identities were blurred and mischief was encouraged. Eleanor, wearing a simple silver mask and a pale blue gown, felt a rare sense of anonymity and freedom. She had wandered away from her aunt's group to admire a fountain when a figure detached itself from the shadows of a nearby gazebo. He wore the mask of a grinning devil, but she recognized the sneering voice immediately. Playing the innocent Miss Vance, Viscount Ashworth, said his voice, a low sneer. "It does not suit you." Eleanor turned to leave, but he moved to block her path. "I have a proposition for you," he said, his eyes glittering behind the mask. "You want a title of fortune. Ravenshire is a broken man. He will never marry you. He thinks he is a curse upon all he touches. Help me, and I can provide you with a much more suitable match. A comfortable life far from the scandal that follows him. Help you do what Eleanor asked, her voice cold. Ruin him." Ashworth whispered the word full of venom. "He took my cousin's life as surely as if he had pulled the trigger himself. His brother was a fool, but Alistair, Alistair is the one who deserved to fall. He has lived with his guilt for 5 years. I want him to live with nothing else." Eleanor stared at him horrified. This was not about justice. It was about a bitter, all-consuming vengeance. "You are despicable." "I am realistic," he countered. "And you are my opportunity. A word from you, a fabricated letter, a tearful confession that he has compromised you. His fragile reputation would shatter. Society would turn on him completely. He would be utterly alone, as he deserves to be." Never Eleanor breathed her revulsion, giving her strength. "I would never do such a thing." Ashworth's smile vanished. "Then you are a fool. You have aligned yourself with a losing side, Miss Vance. And you will pay the price." He reached out and snatched the mask from her face, exposing her to the crowd. "Look, everyone!" he shouted, his voice ringing with malicious glee. "It is the Duke's little pet, the country, nobody who thinks she can tame the beast of Ravenshire." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Heads turned. Whispers erupted. It was a public, brutal humiliation. Tears of anger and shame pricked at Eleanor's eyes. She stood frozen, trapped in a spotlight of scandal. And then the spotlight moved. A figure, tall and imposing, pushed through the crowd. He wore no mask, his face a thunderous sculpture of rage. Alistair. He had seen it all. He strode directly to Ashworth, his presence so menacing that the Viscount instinctively took a step back. "You have made a grave error," Ashworth Alistair said, his voice deadly calm, a terrifying contrast to the fury blazing in his eyes. He didn't look at Eleanor. His entire focus was on the man who had just tried to destroy her. Without another word, he drew back his fist and struck the Viscount square in the jaw. The sound of the impact was sickeningly loud, and Ashworth crumpled to the ground, his devil mask skittering across the gravel path. A collective scream went through the crowd. The Duke of Ravenshire had just assaulted a Viscount in the middle of Vauxhall Gardens. It was a scandal beyond repair. Alistair ignored the chaos he had created. He turned to the stunned and trembling Eleanor, his eyes blazing. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not painful, and pulled her through the parting sea of shocked revelers. "Come with me," he commanded, his voice raw. "This ends now." He was no longer pushing her away. He was pulling her directly into the heart of the storm he had just unleashed. Alistair did not stop until he had pulled her into a secluded, moonlit rose garden, far from the prying eyes and panicked whispers of the main promenade. The air was cool and fragrant, a stark contrast to the heated, ugly scene they had just left behind. He released her arm but continued to pace back and forth like a caged tiger, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "I am a fool," he bit out, not looking at her. "A damned arrogant fool." "You defended me," Eleanor said, her voice barely a whisper. She was still shaking. "I destroyed you," he roared, whirling to face her. The agony on his face was terrible to behold. "Don't you see this is what I do? This is the poison I spoke of. I warned you, Eleanor. I begged you to stay away. By striking Ashworth, I have just confirmed every rumor he has ever spread. I have tied your name to mine with a knot of scandal that can never be undone. By this time tomorrow, your reputation will be in tatters. All because of me." He was right. She knew he was right. The social consequences of what had just happened would be catastrophic for her. Yet looking at him, seeing his self-loathing and despair, she felt not fear for herself, but a profound, overwhelming sorrow for him. "Perhaps my reputation is not as important to me as it is to you," she said softly. He stopped his pacing and stared at her, his expression incredulous. "How can you say that your future, your marriage, prospects, your place in society, I have jeopardized it all. And what about your future? She countered, taking a brave step towards him. You have lived as a ghost for 5 years, Alistair, letting men like Ashworth dictate the terms of your existence, hiding from the world, hiding from yourself. You warned me away not to protect me from your reputation, but to protect me from him, didn't you? From the vipers who would use me to hurt you. His silence was her answer. The truth of her words hung between them in the moonlight. He had seen her as a vulnerability, a weakness his enemies could exploit. His coldness, his warnings, they had been a shield meant for her protection. I cannot bear it, he finally whispered, his voice breaking. He sank onto a stone bench, burying his face in his hands. Watching him humiliate you, knowing it was my fault you were his target, I could not stand by. Not again. I stood by once and watched my brother die. I will not stand by and watch the life of the only woman I have ever... The only woman... He couldn't finish the sentence. Eleanor's heart fractured and soared all at once. She sat down beside him, her gown brushing against his dark coat. The air was thick with unspoken confessions. Tell me what truly happened, Alistair, she urged gently. Not the rumours, not the whispers, the truth. He let out a long, ragged breath and finally dropped his hands, his tormented gaze meeting hers. Isabelle Dubois. She was my brother's mistress. But she was persuasive. She made me believe she was trapped, that George was possessive and cruel to her. She played on my sympathy, on my role as the protective younger brother. The night before the duel, she came to me. She told me Croft had discovered their affair and was blackmailing her. She begged me to speak to George to get him to pay Croft off. I believed her. He shook his head, a look of bitter disgust on his face. So I went to my brother. I accused him of mistreating her. I told him he was a fool to risk his name for such a woman. I called him weak. He in turn called me a sanctimonious prig who was jealous of him, jealous of his charm, his title, his freedom. He said I coveted everything he had. We said terrible things to each other. The next morning he continued, his voice hollow. I discovered the truth. A friend told me Isabel had been playing both of them. Croft wasn't blackmailing her. He was her other lover. They were planning to use my brother's money to run away together. The duel was a result of Croft's own jealousy. I tried to tell George on that field, but he wouldn't listen. He thought it was another one of my lectures, another attempt to control him. He stepped onto that field to defend the honor of a woman who had none, and to prove his bitter, judgmental younger brother wrong. And I watched him die for it. Tears were now tracking silently down Eleanor's cheeks. She reached out her fingers, brushing his cheek. That is a terrible burden to carry, but it is not your fault. You were deceived. As was he. But I should have known, he insisted, his voice cracking. I should have seen through her. My last words to him were insults. My last action was to lecture him. I have lived with that every day, and I swore I would never again allow my attachments to bring ruin to anyone. So I closed myself off. It was safer. Until you. He turned fully towards her, his hands coming up to cup her face, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. His touch was electric, a brand of heat and tenderness on her skin. You, Eleanor Vance, he murmured, his stormy eyes searching hers in the pale moonlight. With your quiet strength and your fiercely intelligent eyes that see far too much. You walked into my grey world, and I could not look away. I tried. God knows I tried to stay away. But my heart, it had other ideas. It followed you from the very first moment. And I am so sorry for where it has led you. "Don't be," she whispered, leaning into his touch. "Don't you dare be sorry." And then there were no more words. He lowered his head and his lips met hers. It was not a kiss of polite romance, but a kiss of desperate, pent-up longing. It was the taste of 5 years of solitude, of regret, and of a hope he thought had long since died. It was a confession, a surrender, and a promise all in one. In the ruins of her reputation, in the heart of a scandal of his own making, Alistair Beaumont had finally stopped running. He had chosen her. The kiss in the rose garden had changed everything. When Alistair finally took Eleanor home in the early hours of the morning, the mood in the carriage was not one of despair, but of quiet, resolute purpose. He had spent years allowing the past to define him. Now, he would define his future. The following day, London was ablaze with the news. The Duke of Ravenshire had assaulted Viscount Ashworth over a penniless companion. It was the scandal of the decade. Lady Danbury was beside herself with hysterics, but Eleanor faced her with a calm she hadn't known she possessed. "I have made my choice, Aunt," she said simply. Just before noon, the Ravenshire carriage arrived. But it was not Alistair who stepped out. It was a man of law, the Duke's solicitor, who delivered a large sealed envelope to Lady Danbury's butler. Within minutes, another carriage arrived, this one bearing the crest of the powerful Earl of Sutherland. The Earl himself, a man whose honour was unimpeachable, entered the house. The social chessboard was being rearranged, and no one yet understood the game. Alistair, meanwhile, was not hiding. He was making a call to the one man he knew Ashworth could not afford to offend his primary creditor, a notoriously ruthless banker named Mr. Davies. The Duke's meeting was brief and brutally effective. He presented Mr. Davies with a stack of promissory notes. "These are Viscount Ashworth's gambling debts," Alistair explained. "I have spent the last 2 years quietly buying them up. They amount to a sum that would bankrupt him 10 times over. I am calling them due. Effective immediately." Mr. Davies's eyes widened. "But your Grace, the Viscount is a man who has slandered a lady under my protection." Alistair said, his voice cold as steel. "His financial ruin is now a matter of principle. However, I am a reasonable man. I will forgive the entire debt on one condition: he provides a full, written, public apology to Miss Eleanor Vance for his baseless accusations, and then removes himself from London for no less than 5 years. If he refuses, you may proceed with his utter destruction. The choice is his." Faced with financial annihilation, Ashworth had no choice. By that afternoon, a letter arrived at every major house in Mayfair. In it, the Viscount offered a grovelling apology to the much-maligned Miss Vance, admitting his words at Vauxhall were the result of too much drink and a personal animosity towards the Duke. He announced his immediate departure for the Continent for an extended tour. It was a humiliating defeat. Simultaneously, the esteemed Earl of Sutherland began paying calls explaining to the chief gossips of the Ton that his own niece had witnessed the event, and confirmed that the Viscount's behaviour towards the young Miss Vance had been reprehensible, and that the Duke's actions, while spirited, were those of a gentleman defending a lady's honour. In a matter of hours, Alistair had not fought the scandal with denials, but had systematically dismantled its source and rewritten the narrative. He had used his power and wealth not to hide, but to protect. With the fires put out, he had one final visit to make. He arrived at Lady Danbury's house himself this time. He was shown into the drawing-room where Eleanor was waiting alone. She looked at him, her heart in her eyes. "It is done," he confirmed. "Ashworth will trouble you no more." He walked towards her, stopping just before her. The tormented, haunted man from the park was gone. In his place stood a duke who was finally comfortable in his own skin, a man who had faced his demons and won. "Eleanor," he began, his voice deep and earnest. "For 5 years I have lived in shadow, believing I was unworthy of light. I believed my heart was a curse I could not inflict on another. You have shown me that a heart is not a curse but a compass, and mine, it points only to you." He went down on one knee, taking her hand in his. His touch was no longer hesitant, but sure and warm. "I warned you to stay away from me, and it was the greatest lie I have ever told. What I meant to say was, do not leave me, for I fear I am lost without you. Eleanor Vance, would you do me the profound honor of becoming my wife? Would you be my duchess, my compass, and my dawn?" Tears of joy streamed down Eleanor's face. Yes, she breathed her voice, thick with emotion. "Oh, Alistair, yes." He rose and drew her into his arms, his kiss sealing their promise. It was not a desperate, frantic kiss like the one in the garden, but one filled with peace, certainty, and the promise of 1,000 tomorrows. The Duke of Ravenshire had been a man defined by a tragic duel at dawn, but now, with Eleanor in his arms, his life was finally beginning with a new one. The wedding was a quiet affair, a stark contrast to the scandal that had preceded it. Held in the centuries-old chapel at Ravenshire Castle, with only Lady Danbury and a few trusted friends in attendance, it was a ceremony not for society, but for the two souls at its centre. 3 months later, as autumn painted the sprawling estate in hues of gold and crimson, Duchess Eleanor Beaumont, the former Miss Vance, was finally beginning to understand the depth of her new life. Ravenshire Castle was much like its master had been, vast, imposing, and steeped in a profound melancholy. For years, Alistair had treated it as a mausoleum, a place to house his guilt. Dust sheets had covered priceless furniture, and the grand halls had echoed only with the lonely footsteps of a skeleton staff. But now life was returning to the castle. Under Eleanor's gentle guidance, windows were thrown open to the crisp autumn air. The scent of beeswax and lemon polish replaced the stale smell of dust, and fires crackled cheerfully in every hearth. She had not commanded these changes. She had inspired them, treating the staff with a kindness and respect that made them eager to please their new duchess. She was standing in the long gallery, a magnificent room lined with the portraits of Alistair's ancestors when he found her. She was gazing up at a painting of a handsome, laughing young man with Alistair's eyes, but a much softer smile. "George Beaumont, I thought I might find you here." Alistair's voice, now stripped of its harsh, defensive edge, was a warm presence behind her. He came to stand beside her, his arm sliding naturally around her waist. He was no longer a man who dressed only in the colour of mourning. His deep green coat spoke of life and earth. He had a beautiful smile, Eleanor said softly, her head leaning against his shoulder. "I wish I could have known him." Alistair was silent for a moment, and she felt the old tension flicker within him before it subsided, like the last tremor of a storm that has passed. "He would have adored you," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that was no longer pain, but a gentle, wistful affection. George loved life, and he was drawn to anyone with a spark of it in their soul. He would have found your wit delightful and your courage astounding. He sighed a sound of peace, not sorrow. For years I could not walk into this gallery. Seeing him like this, it was a reminder of all I had lost of my own failure. But now, when I look at him, I remember the brother who taught me to ride, the one who smuggled me sweets from the kitchen, the man who could charm a bird from a tree. He turned to her, his stormy eyes clear and filled with love. "You did that, Eleanor. You gave me my brother back. You allowed me to remember the man, not just his death." Eleanor's heart swelled. This was the greatest gift she could have given him. Not a title, not a fortune, but peace. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "Come. There is something I wish to show you." He led her from the gallery through the grand ballroom, where he promised they would host a Christmas ball to rival any in London, and out onto a wide stone terrace. Below them, the formal gardens sloped down towards a shimmering lake, the ancient oaks of Ravenshire, standing as silent golden sentinels. This view, he said, gesturing to the breathtaking landscape. This is the heart of Ravenshire. For 5 years I saw only decay. I saw the duties I was failing, the legacy I was tarnishing. I saw a lonely future in a cold, empty house. He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her cheeks, the autumn sun caught in her hair, turning the simple brown strands into a halo of light. Now I look at this, and I see our home. I imagine our children running on that lawn. I hear laughter in the halls, not echoes. You are the heart of Ravenshire now, Eleanor. He lowered his head and kissed her a deep, tender kiss, filled with the quiet joy of a happiness that had been hard won. I warned you to stay away from me, he murmured against her lips, the words that had once been a cold command, now an intimate confession of his past fears. And I thank God every day that you did not listen. Eleanor smiled, her own joy shining brightly. Your heart followed my every step, Alistair. It was only a matter of time before the rest of you caught up. He laughed, a true, unburdened sound that was still new and wonderful to her ears. He pulled her close, and together they stood on the terrace, the Duke and his Duchess, no longer defined by the shadows of the past, but looking forward to a future as bright and as beautiful as the autumn day that surrounded them. And so the story of the dark Duke and the quiet companion found its happy ending, not in the absence of shadows, but in the courage to face them. Alistair and Eleanor's journey reminds us that the deepest warnings often come from the deepest wounds, and that a heart, no matter how guarded, will always follow its true path. Theirs was a love forged not in the easy sunlight of ballrooms, but in the challenging twilight of scandal and secrets, proving that true strength isn't about avoiding pain, but about choosing who is worth fighting for. If their story of love, courage, and redemption moved you, please take a moment to show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed it. Share this video with a friend who loves a story where love conquers all. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales of drama, romance, and hard-won happiness. Your support allows us to keep bringing these stories to life. Thank you for listening.